Heading into the playoffs, the freedom of movement guidelines remain a key part of maintaining a free-flowing game in the NBA. On this first play, keep your eye on the highlighted defensive player, Dante DiVincenzo. As the offensive player, Daniel Gafford, moves to set a screen, DiVincenzo extends his arms and he pushes Gafford, affecting his ability to set the screen. This type of contact by DiVincenzo is illegal and the defensive foul was correctly called. Another example of a defender affecting an offensive player's freedom of movement can be seen here. The highlighted defensive player, C.J. McCollum, steps to his right and he moves into the path of his moving opponent, Kevin Huerter, and McCollum delivers a blow with his shoulder. This off-ball contact by McCollum is illegal and the defensive foul is correctly called by the trail official. As we know, the freedom of movement guidelines extend from the perimeter into the post area. Areas of enforcement include wraps, holds, and dislodges. Here, the highlighted defensive player, Jaren Jackson Jr., wraps his right arm around the midsection of the offensive player, Anthony Davis, as Davis looks to receive the entry pass. This illegal wrap by Jackson was correctly ruled a defensive foul by the slot official. This next play is another example of a defensive foul in the post. The highlighted defender, Alex Caruso, initiates illegal contact with his opponent, Pascal Siakam, by clamping and holding Siakam's left arm. This clamping action is not a legal move, as Siakam's freedom of movement is clearly affected. Again, this is a defensive foul on Caruso. The next part of the freedom of movement guidelines to review is contact on screens. Here, the highlighted offensive player, Charles Bassey, moves to set a screen, but he then rolls to his right, making illegal contact with his opponent, Ochai Agbaji, and the offensive foul for an illegal screen was correctly called. To be considered legal, the screener must get directly in his opponent's path and give him the opportunity to avoid contact. Watch the contact on this next play closely. The highlighted offensive player, Bam Adebayo, moves to set a screen, but he then extends both arms and he pushes the on-ball defender, Franz Wagner. This illegal contact clearly affects Wagner's ability to play defense, and the offensive foul was correctly called by the slot official. This next play is another example of an illegal screen set against a moving opponent. The highlighted offensive player, Anthony Gill, does not give his moving opponent, Grant Williams, an opportunity to avoid contact, and an illegal screen needed to be called on this play. Again, to be considered legal, the screener must get directly in his opponent's path and give him the opportunity to avoid contact. The speed of the defender will determine the distance that the screener must give to avoid contact. The next type of illegal screen that we will see involves a dribble handoff. The highlighted offensive player, Trendon Watford, hands the ball off to his teammate, Damian Lillard, but he continues moving forward and he moves into the path of the trailing defender, Kyle Kuzma. Watford clearly does not give Kuzma the opportunity to avoid the contact, and the offensive foul was correctly called. Next, let's review some examples of the transition take foul rule. On this first play, the defensive player, Isaiah Jackson, does not make a legitimate attempt at the ball, and instead he effectively gives up on the play by reaching out and grabbing the shoulder of the dribbler, Saben Lee, in a non-basketball manner. This was correctly ruled a transition take foul. The next play is another example of a foul that would not be ruled a transition take foul. Following the turnover, the highlighted player, Patrick Beverley, fouls his opponent, Killian Hayes, before Hayes is able to gain possession of the ball. Since this foul occurs before Hayes gains possession, this was correctly ruled a loose ball foul and not a transition take foul. The final play in this section is another example of a defensive foul that would not be ruled a transition take foul. The highlighted defensive player, Quentin Grimes, grabs the waist of his off-ball opponent, Harrison Barnes, in an effort to slow Barnes' progress. While this is a clear defensive foul on Grimes, please note that it is a basketball play, as Grimes has not given up on the play, and therefore this would be ruled a common foul and not a transition take foul. As we have detailed all season, the NBA implemented more stringent protocols for bench conduct, specifically in regards to game disruption and/or game distraction. Violations of the bench conduct guidelines include the use of towels or other props to attempt to distract opponents. Here, the highlighted player, Blake Griffin, waits until just before the opposing player attempts his free throw, and Griffin then throws his towel high into the air. This is a violation, and a technical foul should have been assessed on this play to Griffin. This next example shows a bench player walking out onto the court during live play. After the made basket by his teammate, Giannis Antetokounmpo takes several steps from the bench area and moves out onto the floor. The officials correctly assessed an immediate technical foul for this violation. Again, players who are not in the game are not permitted to be on the playing court at any time for any reason. Another aspect of the bench conduct guidelines involves bench players and/or assistant coaches standing in front of their bench for extended periods of time. Here, we will see two examples back to back of teams committing this type of violation. Teams standing in this manner during live play violates the bench conduct guidelines, and delay of game penalties and subsequent technical fouls will be assessed. In contrast to the previous examples, these next two clips show teams spontaneously standing to celebrate a play on the floor. These are legal reactions, and no penalties would be assessed on either of the examples shown here. Again, to be clear, bench players and assistant coaches may legally stand up to spontaneously celebrate a play on the floor, but they then must sit back down on the bench within a reasonable amount of time. Our final point of education to review is respect for the game, and we will start this section by showing an example of a reaction that exceeds the guidelines. Here, the highlighted player, Aaron Gordon, reacts to the non-call by turning toward the official on the baseline and clapping overtly at that official. This type of overt reaction exceeds the respect for the game guidelines, and a technical foul was correctly assessed. Another example of a player exceeding the respect for the game guidelines can be seen here. The highlighted player, Brandon Ingram, throws the ball forcefully against the basket support following the defensive foul call and the made basket by his opponent. Players are not allowed to intentionally or forcefully throw or kick the ball against the basket support for any reason. Any violation of this rule will result in a technical foul. We will conclude the video with a series of examples that show positive interactions between players and officials. The players and the officials shown here communicate in a calm and professional manner. They maintain their composure and they avoid any unnecessary gestures. As we head into the playoffs, it is the continuing goal for our players and our officials to exhibit this type of mutual respect on a nightly basis.